The location of the supply management department within an entity's organizational structure greatly influences that department's ability to function optimally and influence the decision-making process involved in effective procurement. The lower supply management is on the organizational chart, the less likely it is that it can influence corporate strategy significantly. In practice, the Center for Advanced Purchasing Studies found the supply organizational structure was forced to be congruent with the overall corporate structure as opposed to selecting the most appropriate structure for large firms. The importance of supply management in any firm is determined largely by four factors. Availability of materials and services. Are the major materials and services used by the firm readily available in a competitive market? Or are some key materials and services both in volatile markets that are subject to periodic shortages and price instability? If the latter condition prevails, creative performance by analytical supply management professionals is required. This typically is a top-level group. Absolute dollar volume of purchases. If a company spends a large amount of money for materials and services, the magnitude of the expenditure means that effective supply management usually can produce significant profit. Small unit savings add up quickly when thousands of units are purchased. On the services side, a contract for IT services can run into millions of dollars. Thus, a 10% savings contributes significantly to the bottom line. Percentage of product cost represented by materials and services. When a firm's materials and outsourced services cost account for 40% or more of its total operating budget, small reductions in material and service costs increase profit significantly. Well-executed supply management usually pays handsome dividends in such companies. Types of materials and services purchased. Perhaps even more important than the preceding considerations is the amount of control purchasing and supply personnel have over the availability, quality, and costs of purchased materials and services. Most large companies use a wide range of materials and services, many of whose prices and service arrangements definitely can be influenced by creative purchasing performance. Some firms, in contrast, use a fairly small number of standard production and supply materials or services from which even a top-flight purchasing and supply department can produce little profit through the use of creative management, pricing, and supplier selection activities. The starting point in thinking about potential organization structures is a delineation and an analysis of the work to be done by the unit, the responsibilities and activities. The 6 classifications of work in a purchasing operation are as follows. Management. Management of the purchasing and supply function involves all the tasks associated with the management process, with an emphasis on the development of policies, procedures, control, and the mechanics for coordinating purchasing operations with those of other departments. On an exception basis, it also involves the management of unique supplier and commodity problems. Buying supply management. This includes a wide variety of activities such as working with users to help develop requirements and specifications, reviewing requisitions, analyzing bids, negotiating, and selecting suppliers. Additional responsibilities involve continuing work with a supplier to improve the supplier's capability and performance in the areas of cost, quality, and service. Contract and relationship management. This responsibility ranges from monitoring purchase orders and working with accounts payable to the application of project management skills to a key procurement such as a construction project. Relationship management is appropriate for many major procurements in which the supplier's motivation, cooperation, and collaboration are essential factors in a successful relationship and a successful procurement. Strategic planning and research work. A well-developed purchasing and supply management operation has a large number of research projects and systems studies that require specialized knowledge and analytical ability. The more an organization has progressed toward a supply management focus, the more emphasis it places on these strategic activities. The core activities in this area include economic, industry, and supply market studies. the development of buying strategies for material or services buying, the development and implementation of supply-based and partnering plans, product research and value analysis work, and operating and information systems analysis. Follow-up and expediting. Order follow-up activity involves various types of supplier liaison work, such as reviewing the status of orders and occasionally visiting suppliers. Clerical activities. Every department must enter orders and maintain working files, catalog and library materials, and records for commodities, suppliers' prices, and so on. The precise manner in which purchasing work is subdivided and grouped depends on the size of the department, which depends on the size of the company. In small firms, responsibilities may be handled by a purchasing or supply manager and one or two assistants. Everyone wears several hats. In large organizations, the department may consist of 100 to 300 purchasing and supply professionals. A major activity or responsibility for any purchasing and supply management department is to provide an uninterrupted flow of materials and services. The tasks required to accomplish this goal often are referred to as tactical or operational activities. These activities are not a great source of cost savings yet, are critical in avoiding tremendous losses resulting from potential disruptions in operations. Operational activities offer minimal value-added benefits, but are often pressing and time-consuming. The focus on such tactical activities results in less time being allocated to profit-generating strategic activities. The figure here demonstrates various operational and strategic characteristics and activities. Supply managers have begun to see the need for two types of resources in their organization. First, a team of people who manage the operational and tactical activities of purchasing and materials management. And second, supply managers who are involved in the development of broader strategic aspects of the function. These organizations are in a position to separate operational and strategic responsibilities formally in their organizational structures. This ability to focus on the strategic sourcing process promises long-term increased profitable sales and cost savings, improving profitability and competitive advantage. The placement of supply management decision-making authority affects the structure of the supply organization. Centralized authority exists when the decision-making process is the responsibility of a single person. This person is held accountable by top management for the proper performance of purchasing activities. Decentralization of purchasing authority occurs when personnel from other functional areas, production, engineering, operations, marketing, finance, and so on, make unilateral decisions on sources of supply or negotiate with suppliers directly for major purchases. As discussed throughout the course, this concept is concerned solely with the placement of purchasing authority. It has nothing to do with the location of buying personnel. When functioning properly, centralized purchasing produces the following benefits: reduces potential duplication of effort, leverages volume purchases. Volume discounts are possible when all company orders for the same and similar materials are consolidated. In addition, a firm is able to project an unified policy to its suppliers, gaining maximum competitive advantage from its total economic power. Consolidation. Consolidation provides an opportunity to standardize and simplify parts. Additional benefits can be gained from value analysis and value engineering coordinated through a centralized function. Transportation savings. Transportation savings can be realized through the consolidation of orders and delivery schedules. Allows for specialization. Centralization develops purchasing specialists whose primary concern is purchasing. With training, purchasing specialists inevitably buy more efficiently than less skilled individuals can. Reduction of suppliers' costs. Suppliers are able to offer better prices and better service because their expenses are reduced. Their sales personnel make fewer calls, prepare fewer orders, make fewer shipments, prepare fewer invoices, and do less record keeping. Improved inventory control. More effective inventory control is possible because of company-wide knowledge of stock levels, material usage, lead times and prices. Lower administrative costs. Fewer orders are processed for the same quantity of goods purchased, reducing purchasing, receiving, inspection, accounts payable, and record-keeping expenses. Centralized control. Responsibility for the performance of the purchasing function is placed with a single department head, facilitating management control. And last, reduction in the cost of services. Despite the general advantages of centralization, complete centralized purchasing is neither always possible nor always desirable. Four types of situations justify some decentralization. The first is found in companies that process single natural raw materials. Many of those firms separate the purchase of key raw materials from the purchase of other materials. Firms in the textile, leather, food, beverage, and tobacco industries are good examples. In these industries, the raw materials are products of nature that are purchased in unstable markets in which prices fluctuate widely. Buying typically takes place at auctions or through commodity exchanges conducted in small local warehouses. In such markets, a practical knowledge of grades is equally as important as knowledge of prices. Buyers of these commodities usually guard their specialized know-how with secrecy, frequently handing it down from one generation to the next. A second situation justifying some decentralization of purchasing authority exists in technically oriented firms that are heavily involved in research. In those firms, some exceptions to complete centralization are always desirable. Many one-time purchases in the research, design engineering, and related departments can be handled more effectively by professional personnel in these departments. Moreover, the dollar volume of such purchases is usually relatively small. The third situation justifying a different type of decentralization is found in the operation of multi-site institutional and manufacturing organizations. Decentralization in this circumstance can allow for faster response time for the requisitioner, a better understanding of the requirements unique to that plant, quicker support in product development projects, and ownership of the process and products. And fourth, the purchase of non-technical odds and ends often calls for a partial decentralization of purchasing. Credit card and petty cash fund purchases of less than several $100s are a good example. Decentralizing through the use of these approaches can be a money saver. The danger of losing purchasing control does not stem from partial decentralization of the purchasing function per se. Some decentralization is necessary as a matter of common sense. The use of cross-functional teams in the decision-making process is increasing. Organizations are changing to compete in the global market. Companies are seeking to take advantage of both structures by forming a hybrid structure that includes both decentralized decision making. This results in the best of both structures, maintaining necessary control while meeting the unique needs of the other functions or divisions. It is important to state clearly in written purchasing policies, the purchasing manual and supplier welcome booklets who has the authority to buy what, that is, who are the agents authorized to sign purchase orders and purchase agreements. As was stated previously, the position of the supply management department on a firm's organizational chart can vary. However, as materials gained in importance, becoming a larger portion of the cost of goods sold, issues such as inflated inventories, poor quality, material stockouts, long lead times, and miscommunications provided the impetus for a movement to capture control of materials under one individual. This gave rise to the materials management approach to structuring the material portion of an organization. The concept of organizing the functions that affect the acquisition, movement, and storage of materials under one manager evolved in the early 60s. The term materials management was introduced to describe an integrated systems approach to the coordination of materials activities and the control of total material costs. The purchasing, planning and scheduling, transportation, and warehousing functions were organized under the control and responsibility of one individual, the materials manager. The objective was to optimize performance of the materials system as opposed to sub-optimizing the performance of the individual functions that are parts of the material systems. The results were great improvements in inventory levels, customer service and communications, ultimately improving the bottom line. In the late 80s, Japan invaded the US automobile market with cars assembled in Japan. This marked the beginning of globalization as we know it today. The early 90s saw the appearance of personal computers on the desktops of organizations, putting data and information at the fingertips of managers. With the introduction of the internet, the information age began. Through these developments, the concept of managing materials for competitive advantage flourished. The materials management structure evolved beyond the idea of managing the corporation's inventory and those functions responsible for supply. The broader concept of supply chain management grew to encompass the planning and management of all activities involved in forecasting, sourcing and procurement, and all incoming logistics management activities. It broke down the functional silos, creating integrated processes throughout the total organization. Cross-functional teams have become a common approach to addressing many supply management related activities, including new product development, value analysis and value engineering, standardization and simplification, engineering change management, the development of statements of work describing services requirements, commodity teams, the acquisition of capital and operating equipment, make, buy and outsourcing analysis, source selection, potential supplier field reviews, negotiation, post-award management and problem solving, supplier development, and the development of strategic alliances. Since cross-functional teams require a significant investment in human resources, their use commonly is limited to time-critical and high monetary value activities. The next lecture addresses cross-functional teams in greater detail. Budgeting and staffing. Obviously, all firms have a budget process that involves planning the operational activities and the resources to accomplish the tasks, including people, facilities, software equipment, office supplies, training, and travel expenses for the next operating period. This is why we recommend the Chief Procurement Officer prepare an annual materials report that lists the annual spend by type of materials, the major contracts with key suppliers, the number of personnel and their training activities, on-time delivery percentage, quality record, cost savings, value analysis, value engineering projects, partnerships and alliances, variance analysis, cost avoidance achievements, and any other activities to inform all concerned as the total materials activities of the firm. The most critical assets of any organization is its people. The days of purchasing personnel learning their jobs via on-the-job training are long over. It is highly recommended that supply managers hire graduates with business degrees and preferably majors in purchasing or materials management from colleges with a focus in supply chain management. Typical positions include MRO buyer, capital equipment buyer, buyer planner for scheduling, inventory control analyst, tool crib keeper, raw materials buyer by type as the volume warrants, commodity manager, traffic specialist, sourcing expert, and other specialists as needed. The position of expeditor has been greatly reduced as we move to better sourcing. Many expeditors chasing delayed or lost shipments means the sourcing process is marginal. In the previous section, we looked at ways of controlling the movement of materials. In particular, we said that the main options use a series of schedules with traditional planning and MRP or by Kanbans with just-in-time. These control the internal flows and can be extended along supply chains. Whatever system is used, there must be some trigger to initiate the actual flow of materials from one organization to another. With ERP, this is provided by Kanban, but more generally it comes from a purchase order. This is a message that an organization sends to a supplier saying that they have negotiated and agreed terms, so they have to send materials and they will pay. Purchase orders initiate the actual flow of materials from a vendor to a purchaser. Purchasing is the function responsible for buying all the materials needed by an organization. Essentially, this means that it sends out the purchase orders, but this is only one step that comes after the main job of preparing the way for the orders. In practice, many transactions are not simple purchases, but they may include rental, leasing, contracting, exchange, gifts, and so on. It is really more accurate to talk about the acquisition of materials, or the more common term of procurement. Procurement is responsible for acquiring all the materials needed by an organization. It consists of the related activities that get goods, services, and other materials from suppliers and into the organization. People often assume that procurement is the same as purchasing, but strictly speaking, there is a difference. Purchasing describes the actual buying, while procurement has a broader meaning that can include different types of acquisition, purchasing, rental, contracting, and so on, as well as the associated work of selecting suppliers, negotiating, agreeing terms, expediting, monitoring supplier performance, arranging delivery, organizing transport, checking arrivals, and so on. Procurement arranges the change of ownership of materials, organizes the delivery, and does all the related administration. Every organization needs a reliable supply of materials, and as procurement is responsible for organizing this supply, it is an essential function within every organization. More specifically, it forms an essential link between vendors and purchasers, and provides the mechanism that triggers the movement of materials. If it is done badly, materials do not arrive, or the wrong materials are delivered, in the wrong quantities, at the wrong time, poor quality, high price, and so on. Successful procurement does not ensure an organization's success, but you can find many examples where poor procurement has led to inevitable failure. Procurement is responsible for much of a company's spending, so a relatively small improvement can give substantial benefits. Suppose that a company buys raw materials for $60, spends $40 on operations, and then sells the product for $110. It clearly makes a profit of $10 per unit. Now suppose that procurement negotiates a 5% discount on materials. Materials now cost $57, and with the same selling price, the $3 savings goes straight to the profit. The profit on each unit now jumps to $13. So a 5% decrease in material costs raises the profit by 30%. Now let's see an example. Last year, ABC Company had total sales of $108 million. Their direct costs were $58 million for materials, $27 million for employees, and $12 million for overhead. What is the effect of reducing the cost of materials by 1%? If material costs are not reduced, how much would sales have to increase or overheads fall to get the same effect? The actual profit last year was $11 million. If the cost of material drops by 1%, it falls by $57.42 million, saving $0.58 million. The profit rises now to $11.58 million. A 1% decrease in material costs increased profits by 5.3%. Profit as a percentage of sales rises from 10.2 to 10.7%. If material costs do not change, and assuming that other costs remain the same proportion of sales value, then sales would have to rise by 5.3% to get the same increase in profit. To get the same extra profit, the fixed cost would have to fall by 0.58 million or 4.8%. Like logistics itself, procurement was not given much attention until quite recently. It used to be considered little more than a clerical job, buying materials as they were requested. Recently, there has been wider recognition of its importance, and now procurement is considered an important management function in its own right. Organization of procurement. The way that procurement is organized clearly depends on the type and size of the organization. In a small organization, a single buyer might be responsible for all purchases, policy and administration. A medium-sized organization might have a department with buyers, expediters, stockkeepers, and clerks. A large organization might have hundreds of people coordinating huge amounts of purchases. Usually, procurement is organized as a single department to get the benefits of centralized purchasing. These benefits include consolidation of all orders for the same and similar materials to get quantity discounts, coordinating associated activities to reduce costs of transport, stock holding, and administration, eliminating duplicated efforts and haphazard practices, having a single point of contact for suppliers and giving them consistent information and services, developing specialized skills and improving procurement operations, and concentrating responsibility for procurement, making management control easier. These benefits can be considerable, but centralized purchasing has its critics. For example, if you work in an office in Leeds, it seems nonsensical to contact your purchasing department in another city which is 450 kilometers away, to buy materials from a supplier from a city which is 20 kilometers away. An alternative view says that organizations which work over a wide geographical should also consider local purchasing. Local offices are likely to have better knowledge of local conditions and culture, better relations with suppliers, more flexible operations, lower transport costs, and so on. The benefits from local contacts might more than offset the cost of less centralization. In practice, most organizations use a combination of centralized purchases, typically for larger items, and local, typically for smaller items. Historically, supply management has been considered important based on its impact on costs. At an increasing number of firms today, the procurement process is recognized as having a significant impact on sales and revenues. Supply management has an overwhelming impact on the firm's bottom line. It directly affects the two forces that drive the bottom line, sales and costs. Therefore, it must be a core competence of the firm and expertise that is highly valued by the organization. For a typical manufacturing firm, purchasing and supply management are responsible for spending over half of every dollar the firm receives as income from sales. More dollars are spent for purchases of materials and services than for all other expense items combined, including wages, depreciation, taxes, and dividends. It is important for management to note that the cost of materials is approximately 2.5 times the value of all labor and payroll costs, and nearly 1.5 times the cost of labor plus all other expenses of running the business. For the typical services firm, supply management plays an equally important, although subtler role. Millions of dollars are spent on marketing and advertising, communications, and information technology. Those services can enhance or degrade any firm's efficiency and effectiveness. Management at both manufacturing and service firms ensure that supply management professionals are involved at all stages of the procurement of such services. Strategic supply chain management enables a company to maximize its bottom line in an ethical manner. The figure here shows how supply management can drive sales up and costs down. Increased sales. Supply management has a significant impact on a firm's sales, principally in the following 8 areas. Faster to market or time-based competition. 30 years of marketing research has demonstrated the importance of being earlier to market. In many cases, the first firm to introduce a successful new product or service will hold 40 to 60% of the market after competition enters the picture. This research also demonstrates that the profit margins enjoyed by the first firm to introduce a new product tend to be twice those of its competitors. Firms that have embraced strategic supply chain management have reduced their new product development cycles by an average of 30% as a direct result of taking a cross-functional approach to product development. Time-based competition also includes a firm's ability to meet unexpected surges in demand for its products. In many cases, a firm's ability to ramp up production is constrained by its suppliers' abilities to meet those surges in demand. The development and management of a competent, responsive supply base plays a critical role in the firm's ability to meet unexpected demand. Improved quality. We are all sensitive to the quality of the products and services we purchase. An automobile with a reputation for transmission problems will drive potential customers to its competitors. Conversely, a firm whose products or lines of products have a reputation for quality gains market share over its competitors and frequently is able to command premium prices. Some 75% of many manufacturers' quality problems can be traced back to defects in purchased materials. The percentage of quality problems that can be attributed to defective incoming materials for a service provider is usually less but still significant. Pricing flexibility. A research indicates that a strategic approach to supply management will reduce the total cost of ownership associated with purchasing and owning or leasing materials, equipment, and services an average of 25%. When the cost of producing an item or service is reduced, marketing receives the gift of pricing elasticity. Through the application of sound economic principles, marketing can estimate whether net income will increase more by first holding selling price and sales volume constant and increasing net profit per unit. Second, reducing the sales price and thus increasing sales volume. And third, using a combination of increasing net profit while reducing sales price. The same research indicates that of 240 firms surveyed, approximately 35% of all successful new products were the result of technology gained from the supply base. This leveraging of supplier technology is a major source of income for these firms. Collaborative and alliance relationships with the firm supply base play a key role in ensuring and enhancing this technology flow. The development and management of supply relationships is a key responsibility of supply management. Enhanced customer satisfaction. Strategic supply chain management helps achieve shorter fulfillment lead times, consistent on-time delivery, high fill rates, complete orders, quicker responses to customers' requirements, and the ability to meet unique or special requests. The supplier of choice. By providing the best value, a combination of quality, service, and price, a firm becomes the supplier of choice to another channel member or to the end customer. Customer fulfillment flexibility. Strategic supply chain management provides the supply support that allows a firm to be responsive to customer desires for flexible lead time and changes in product configurations. Shorter cycle and lead times. These benefits result from improved supply relationships and involvement in supplier product and process improvements. Lower total cost of ownership. The total cost of ownership is the summation of the cost of acquiring and owning or converting an item of material, piece of equipment or service, and post-ownership costs, including the disposal of hazardous and other manufacturing waste and the cost of lost sales because of a reputation for poor product quality caused by defective materials or purchased services that are incorporated in the end product or service. Better product design. We estimate 70 to 80% of the total cost of ownership is built into a requirement, whether for production materials, equipment, services, or maintenance, repair, and operation items, during the requirements development process. Early supply management and supplier involvement can reduce costs significantly during this critical stage. Acquisition cost. The acquisition cost or price paid for an item or service is normally a major component of the total cost of ownership. As will be seen in the following sections, numerous actions can be taken to reduce the acquisition cost. A few of those activities are a specification of the most cost-effective material or item of equipment, use of the appropriate specification, standardization, good sourcing and pricing practices, and professional contract and supplier relationship management. Processing cost. The cost of developing sourcing and pricing requirements and then ensuring they arrive on time in the quality specified can be reduced significantly by applying efficient supply management processes and techniques. Quality cost. Costs are incurred in ensuring that the buying firm receives the optimal level of quality. These costs may be reduced by applying progressive quality techniques such as the design of prototypes and statistical process control. Selecting suppliers capable of producing the desired level of quality and then certifying their design and manufacturing systems can improve incoming quality while reducing administrative quality costs. Downtime cost. Downtime frequently is the largest component of the total cost of ownership for many items of production and operating equipment. 1 minute of downtime in a production line may cost $26,000. At this rate, an hour of downtime can cost $1,560,000. Thus, when purchasing equipment, the sourcing team must place as much or more emphasis on reliability and maintainability as on purchase price. Risk cost. Many firms needlessly spend millions of dollars to minimize the risk of supply disruptions. These firms maintain needlessly large inventories or dual or even triple sources of supply to ensure continuity of supply. Carefully developed and managed relationships with appropriate suppliers can eliminate the need for most inventory or dual sources. Cycle time cost. While this is difficult to quantify, the shorter the cycle time for virtually all activities, the lower the cost. The shorter the cycle time to bring new products to market, develop a statement of work, or select a new source, the lower the total cost. Conversion cost. Machine time, labor, process, yields, loss, scrap, and rework are examples of conversion costs. These costs are every bit as real as the purchase price of an item entering the production process. A pound of brass may cost twice as much as a pound of steel, but the higher acquisition price for the brass may be more than offset by savings in machine and labor costs during conversion of the brass to a component or end product, because the brass may require less work to make it a usable product. Non-value added costs. A careful analysis of all of the costs involved in bringing an item or service to market frequently reveals that 40 to 60% of the costs confer no added value to the finished good. All members of the supply management system must be on the lookout for non-value added activities at any and all stages of the system. Supply chain cost. The development and management of supply chains and supply networks require a significant investment, primarily in the form of human resources. The proper selection, training, and educating of the individuals involved in these activities, together with the application of software systems, can reduce the necessary investments. Post-ownership cost. These costs frequently are overlooked but must be considered when addressing the total cost of ownership. They include the disposal of scrap and other waste, customer service, warranty costs, and the cost of lost sales resulting from customer dissatisfaction with the product. Investors frequently evaluate top management's performance by calculating the return on the total capital invested in the business. Inventory, equipment, and other materials purchased constitute corporate assets attained through the investment of capital. The fact that supply management frequently is responsible for spending over half of most companies' total dollars highlights the profit-making possibilities of the purchasing and supply function. Every dollar saved in purchasing is equivalent to a new dollar of profit. This figure illustrates these points by showing the relationships of basic elements that influence the return on investment. The figures in parentheses reflect a 5% reduction in the cost of materials for a manufacturing firm. Notice how in this example a 5% reduction in material cost increases return on investment from 10 to 13%, a 30% increase. As we have observed, supply management can have a significant impact on a firm's sales volume. The underlined numbers indicate the impact of a 5% increase in sales, holding all other variable ratios constant. We see that return on investment increases from 10% to 11.42% from increasing sales alone. Now let's look at the combined impact of a 5% increase in sales and a 5% reduction in the total cost of all materials purchased for this volume of activity. The figures in parentheses and underlined in the figure show the combined impact of these two forces. We can see that the combined impact of these two realistically obtainable achievements is to increase return on investment to 14.52%. This is nearly a 50% increase in the firm's return on investment, something most CEOs would die for. As supply management progresses from reactive and mechanical purchasing to proactive procurement and onto strategic supply chain management, a similar transformation is evolving in relationships between buyers and suppliers. During the dark days of reactive purchasing, relations between salespersons representing suppliers and their counterparts in purchasing were reasonably cordial but frequently adversarial. A gain for one resulted in a loss for the other, which is often called a win-lose outcome. The interaction between supplier and purchaser was often characterized by highly manipulative tactics by both parties designed to maneuver the other side into a position where one's gain would be the other's loss. As purchasing became more professional, buyers and suppliers began to see the benefits of more collaborative relationships where the outcome could result in a win-win relationship for both parties. We call the most common and most basic type of relationship transactional. Such a relationship is neither good nor bad. Transactional simply describes an arm's length relationship wherein neither party is especially concerned with the well-being of the other and moves from one contract to another rather than develop any real long-term relationship. Virtually all buying firms will have transactional relationships. Most will have collaborative ones, and some will have strategic alliances. Transactional relationships have several characteristics. An absence of concern by both parties about the other party's well-being. One of a series of independent deals. Each transaction is entered into on its own merits. Costs, data, and forecasts are not shared. Price is the major focus of the relationship. Getting the best price is the focus of the transaction. Quality of the relationship. Since there is little or no concern for the other's well-being, neither buyer nor supplier will rush to the other's assistance in bad times or when problems arise. A minimum of purchasing time and energy is required to establish prices. market forces normally establish prices in transactional relationships. Transactional purchases lend themselves to e-procurement and in some cases reverse auctions. The advantages of transactional relationships include relatively less purchasing time and effort are required to establish price. Lower skills levels of procurement personnel are required. Much less judgment and managerial expertise are required with the vast majority of transactional procurements. The disadvantages of transactional relationships include the following. The potential for communication difficulties is much greater with transactional relationships than with collaborative or alliance ones. Considerable investment in expediting and monitoring incoming quality is required to ensure timely delivery of the right quality. Transactional relationships are inflexible when flexibility may be required. Transactional procurements tend to result in more delivery problems than do collaborative and strategic alliance ones. Quality with transactional relations will be only as good as required. Transactional suppliers tend to provide the minimum service required. Buyers tend to experience less effective performance by their transactional suppliers than do those employing collaborative or strategic relationships. Transactional customers are subject to more supply disruptions than are collaborative or alliance ones. Buyers seldom know the total cost of ownership of the items and services they are purchasing through transactional relationships. Frequent changes in suppliers result in hidden switching costs. One key finding showed 76% of CEOs think external collaboration with business partners and customers is key to innovation. For the procurement of non-commodity items and services, innovative, collaborative, and alliance relationships tend to result in lower total costs than do transactional relationships for several reasons. Such items may require process improvements and the adoption of technical innovations. This is difficult to achieve in transactional relationships. The risks and uncertainties present with transactional relationships reduce the likelihood of investments in research and development and training, as well as the procurement of new, more efficient equipment focused on the customer firm's needs. Thus, major opportunities for cost reduction within supply organizations may be lost with transactional relationships. Longer-term performance agreements allow suppliers an opportunity to reduce their costs. The extended learning curve effect with both production and services allows collaborative and alliance suppliers to reduce their costs and share these savings with customers. Collaborative and alliance relationships replace the market forces employed by transactional procurement with controlled competition, benchmarking, and advanced supply management pricing practices. The results are lower total costs, higher quality, reduced time to market, and reduced risk of supply disruptions. Collaborative relationships. The key difference between collaborative relationships and transactional ones is an awareness of the interdependence and necessity of cooperation. The focus on relationship management will require that all elements of relationship management, including trust building, communications, joint efforts, and planning and fostering interdependency, will be increasingly studied and managed to achieve competitive advantage. Recognition of interdependency and need for cooperation provides many benefits. Both parties are aware that money enters their supply chain or supply network only if the chain's end products are cost competitive. Recognizing the need for interdependence and cooperation, the customer's firm enjoys the benefits of early supplier involvement. The results are improvements in cost, quality, time to market, and the leveraging of supplier technology. Continuous improvement is far easier to implement and manage when both sides recognize their interdependence and cooperate. The end objective with continuous improvement is a reduction in total cost as they strive for greater value together than each could create individually. The likelihood of disruptions in supply is greatly reduced. Collaborative suppliers look out for their friends, not their opportunistic customers. Collaborative relationships help cushion bad times. Both customers and suppliers who value each other based on long-term relationship and respect are more likely to come to each other's aid during times of adversity. Lower total costs are the common result of collaborative and alliance relationships. The level of certainty and continuity of demand in collaborative and alliance relationships increases the likelihood of investment in R&D, training, and the procurement of new, more efficient equipment focused on the customer firm's needs. Cost reductions resulting from value engineering and value analysis are enhanced, and the extended learning curve effect with both production and services activities allows collaborative and alliance suppliers to reduce their costs and share these savings with their customers. The major disadvantage of collaborative and alliance relationships is the amount of human skills, time, and energy required to develop and manage the relationships. Supply alliances. The fundamental difference between collaborative relationships and supply alliances is the presence of institutional trust in alliances. The failure to develop and manage institutional trust is the principal reason that so many supply alliances fail. The primary benefits of supply alliances include the following: lower total cost. Synergies can be created in alliances that cannot happen in transactional or even collaborative relationships. The synergies result in reductions of direct and indirect costs associated with labor, machinery, materials, and overhead. Reduced time to market. Reducing the time to design, develop, and distribute products and services is a key driver that leads to improved market share and better profit margins. Improved quality. The use of both the design of experiments and supplier certification are the norm with supplier alliances. These two activities design and manufacture quality rather than inspect for errors. The result is improved quality at lower total cost, improved technology flow from suppliers. Openness and institutional trust enhance the inflow of technology from alliance partners that leads to many successful new products. Improved continuity of supply. Alliance customers are the group least likely to experience supply disruptions. Here are some of the alliance's most important attributes. The focus of most supplier alliances is achieving the simultaneous objectives of a continuous improvement while squeezing out cost. A high level of recognized interdependence and commitment is present. An atmosphere of cooperation exists. Potential conflicts are addressed and resolved openly. The alliance is controlled through a complex web of formal and informal interpersonal connections, information systems, and internal infrastructures that enhance learning. Openness exists in all areas of the relationship, including cost, long-term objectives, technology, and the supply chain itself. The supplier's perspective. The competition for world-class suppliers is well underway. As a result, the most attractive supplier may decide that a collaborative or alliance relationship with a potential customer firm is not in its best interest. In effect, the supplier may possess economic power that it desires to exercise in an effort to maximize its net income. The classic case is the monopolist. Or the preferred supplier may be unavailable because the buying firm's key competitor may have already established an exclusive relationship. World-class suppliers are careful in their selection of customer firms. The supplier will be very concerned with the potential customer firm's finances, especially as they affect its ability to pay. The customer firm's finances also provide insight into prospects for a long-term relationship and continuing demand for the supplier's products or services. Quality suppliers want customers who have good growth prospects. The potential customer's demand pattern for the supplier's product is of great interest, especially in the areas of stability and fit. World-class suppliers want to ensure that potential customers' quality requirements are within their capabilities. The supplying firm is also very concerned with the buying firm's approach to problems. Does it discipline suppliers who encounter problems, or does it help solve problems together in a mutually beneficial way, deriving critical learning along the way, thus making the problem a learning foundation from which to improve? Suppliers are attracted to customers who have a reputation for working collaboratively with suppliers who experience a problem to identify and correct the root cause of the problem. For suppliers and buyers who comprehend the value of shifting from tactical, transactional based relationships to strategic, value based alliance relationships, it will be essential to engage the multi-dimensional assessment of the elements of total cost of ownership to determine exactly where cost can be reduced, value enhanced, and substantial competitive advantage created. The aim of procurement is to ensure that an organization has the materials that its operations need. This generally means guaranteed deliveries of high-quality products from reliable suppliers. So procurement managers consider questions about what to buy, how much to buy, when to buy, from whom to buy, at what price, with what quality, what conditions, and so on. Typically, this involves the following activities. Identifying users' needs for materials. Procurement usually starts with a user within the organization identifying a need for materials and passing the details to the procurement department. Then the department has to examine the request to purchase and examine the materials, costs, budgets, approvals, and other factors needed to start the procedures. Describing the materials. The procurement department has to get a clear idea of the materials needed, including technical details and costs. This means that they must work closely with user departments, understanding their needs and get an accurate view of the materials. Deciding whether to acquire the materials. Not all requests for purchases are actually justified, so procurement have to ask whether there is a better alternative, such as making the materials internally, using alternative materials that are already in stock, or simply not buying the materials. Deciding the type of purchase. When a decision is made to use outside suppliers, there are several ways of organizing the acquisition, such as purchase, renting, leasing, e-purchases, and so on, and procurement have to find the best. Reviewing market conditions. This considers the general shape of the market for the materials to see how competitive it is, supply conditions, lead times, availability, likely difficulties, new products, and so on. Forming a long list of suppliers. There is a widely variable number of suppliers for any product, so procurement should examine the market and draw up a long list of potential suppliers they could use. Forming a short list of suppliers. This long list will then be screened to get a reasonable number, typically 4 or 5, of the most suitable suppliers. Evaluating the short list. The next task is to do a more detailed check on the remaining suppliers, getting bids for the materials, finding delivery conditions, cost, and so on. Choosing the supplier. All aspects of the short list of suppliers' performance are then compared before doing final negotiations and choosing the best. This identifies the single supplier that is best able to deliver materials with acceptable quality, at the time and place needed with reasonable costs and conditions, while satisfying any other requirements. Ordering the materials. The order is then awarded, confirming details, noting the effects on stock levels, costs, arranging deliveries, and so on. Recording the arrival. This ensures that the materials are delivered as expected and according to conditions. Payment can then be arranged and the transaction is largely completed. Expediting. Sometimes there are problems with materials or deliveries, and some follow-up actions are needed. Typically, a delivery is delayed and procurement has to negotiate with the supplier to sort things out and make the delay as short as possible. Reviewing the purchase. Lessons can always be learned, so procurement should review the purchase process, see what went well and badly, how the supplier performed, and consider a range of related questions. This list shows typical activities for procurement, but the details of any single transaction vary with conditions. It would not be worth going through this type of procedure to buy a few envelopes, but if you want to buy a computer, you will probably do more of the steps. When a company wants to buy a new oil tanker, it adds many other analyses, particularly about design, financing, and delivery. Make or buy decisions. Notice the important point that procurement does not always buy the materials requested. On closer examination, there may be no need for the materials, or there are already alternatives in use. Another option is to make the materials internally rather than buy them, especially when an order is repeated often enough. This gives a standard make or buy decision. The standard setting for this has a manufacturer deciding which of its components it makes itself and which it buys from suppliers. So the simplest form of the make or buy decision asks whether it is cheaper to make a certain item or to buy it. The argument in favor of outsourcing, the buy side of the make or buy decision, is that efficient operations and economies of scale often mean that specialized suppliers can deliver products efficiently at the lowest possible price. The providers give the benefits of specialization, access to greater expertise, lower stock levels, reduced risk, flexibility, and so on. On the other hand, internal operations can be more reliable, give greater control over supply, tailor products, have short lead times, use spare resources, protect designs, keep value-adding operations, and increase the size of the company. In practice, three main considerations in such decisions are financial factors, particularly the total acquisition cost; operational factors, relating to capacity, responsiveness, flexibility, reliability, and so on; and strategic factors, relating to the long-term implications of the decision. As there is a considerable move towards outsourcing, the arguments in its favor are clearly more convincing. Considering the increasing number of materials that are bought in, a much simplified view says, with the three core tasks of procurement: defining what you want, identifying a supplier, and negotiate the terms. The aim is to find the combination of products and suppliers that best satisfies your needs. Two factors stand out above all others when considering the make or buy question at the tactical level: total cost of ownership and availability of production capacity. A good make or buy decision nevertheless requires the evaluation of many less tangible factors in addition to these two basic factors. The following considerations influence firms to make or to buy the items used in their finished products or their operations. Considerations that favor making: cost considerations, desire to integrate plant operations, productive use of excess plant capacity, need to exert direct control over production and quality, design secrecy required unreliable suppliers, and desire to maintain a stable workforce. Other considerations that favor buying are limited production facilities, cost considerations, small volume requirements, suppliers' research and specialized know-how, desire to maintain a stable workforce, desire to maintain a multiple source policy, indirect managerial control considerations, and procurement and inventory considerations. In some cases, cost considerations indicate that a part should be made in-house. In others, they dictate that it should be purchased externally. Cost is obviously important, yet no other factor is subject to more varied interpretation and to greater misunderstanding. A make or buy cost analysis involves a determination of the cost to make an item and a comparison of that cost with the cost to buy the item. The following checklist provides a summary of the major elements that should be included in a make or buy estimate. To make, we have delivered purchase material costs, direct labor costs, any follow-on costs, incremental inventory carrying costs, factory overhead, managerial cost, purchasing cost, and cost of capital. To buy, we have purchase price of the part, transportation cost, receiving and inspection, incremental purchasing cost, and any non-follow cost related to quality or service. To see the comparative cost picture clearly, the analyst must evaluate these costs carefully, considering the effects of time and capacity utilization in the user's plant. The time factor. Cost can be figured on either a short-term or a long-term basis. Short-term calculations tend to focus on direct measurable costs. Therefore, they frequently understate tooling costs and overlook indirect materials costs, such as those incurred in storage, purchasing, inspection, and similar activities. Also, a short-term cost analysis fails to consider the likely future changes in the relative costs of labor, materials, transportation, and so on. Consequently, in comparing the cost to make and to buy, the long-term view is the correct one. Cost figures must include all relevant costs, direct and indirect, and they must reflect the effect of anticipated cost changes. Since it is difficult to predict future cost levels, estimated average cost figures for the total period in question are generally used. Even though an estimate of future costs cannot be completely accurate, the following example illustrates its value. Suppose the user of a stamped part develops permanent excess capacity in its general purpose press department. The firm subsequently decides to make the stamped part that previously had been purchased from a specialized metalworking firm. Because this enables the firm to reactivate several unused presses, the additional cost to make the item is less than the cost to buy it. However, the user finds that the labor segment of its total cost is much higher than the labor segment of the automated supplier's cost. If labor costs continue to rise more rapidly than the other costs of production, the user's cost advantage in making the part may soon disappear. Therefore, an estimate of future cost behavior can prevent a make decision that might prove unprofitable in the future. Another factor that should be considered is the need for time-based competition. Many companies, especially high-tech firms, compete by reducing the amount of time necessary to produce or complete activities. The ability to reduce cycle time is a key strategy for gaining competitive advantage. Time is a critical issue in developing new products and bringing them to market. Making the decision to outsource research and development, the manufacturing or distribution of a product will affect the time required to bring new technology to market. Make or buy decisions have a strong impact on reducing cycle time in all aspects of a business. Next factor is the capacity factor. When the cost to make a part is calculated, determining the relevant overhead cost poses a difficult problem. The root of the problem lies in the user's capacity utilization factor. As in most managerial cost analysis, the costs relevant to make or buy decisions are the incremental costs. In this case, incremental costs are those costs that would not be incurred if the part were purchased outside. The overhead problem centers on the fact that the incremental overhead costs vary from time to time, depending on the extent to which production facilities are utilized by existing products. For example, assume that an automobile engine manufacturer currently buys its piston pins from a distant machine shop. For various reasons, the engine producer now decides that it wants to make the piston pins in its own shop. Investigation reveals that the machine shop is loaded to capacity with existing work and will remain in that condition throughout the foreseeable future. If the firm decides to make its own piston pins, it will have to either purchase additional machining equipment or free existing equipment by subcontracting to an outside supplier a part currently made in-house. In this situation, the incremental factory overhead cost figure should include the variable overhead caused by the production of the piston pins plus the full portion of fixed overhead allocable to the piston pin operation. Now assume that the same engine manufacturer wants to make its own piston pins and that it has enough excess capacity to make the pins in its machine shop with existing equipment. Investigation shows that the excess capacity will exist for at least the next 2 or 3 years. What are its incremental overhead costs to make the pins in this situation? Only the variable overhead caused by production of the piston pins. In this case, fixed overhead represents sunk costs which continue to accumulate whether or not piston pins are produced. The total machine shop building continues to generate depreciation charges. Heat, light, and janitorial services are still furnished to the total machine shop area. Also, property taxes for the machine shop remain the same regardless of the number of machines productively employed. The firm incurs these same fixed costs regardless of the make or buy action it decides on. Such costs under conditions of idle capacity are not incremental costs, and for purposes of the make or buy decision must be omitted from computation of the cost to make a new part. This concept can be observed from a slightly different point of view in the graphic representation of this figure. Note that a 12.5% increase in production volume, an increase from 80 to 90 of capacity, can be achieved by a total cost increase of only 10%. This favorable situation results simply because the 12.5% increase in production is accomplished by activating unused capacity. Fixed overhead costs are incurred irrespective of the decision to make piston pins by utilizing unused capacity. Finally, consider a third common situation in which the same engine manufacturer wants to make its own piston pins. Investigation in this case reveals that enough excess capacity currently exists in the machine shop to permit production of the piston pins. However, management expects a gradual increase in business during the next several years, which will eliminate all excess capacity by the end of the second year. How should the make or buy decision be approached in this particular case? As always, the starting point of the analysis is an estimate of the cost to make versus the cost to buy. For the first 1 to 2 years, the cost to make piston pins will not include fixed overhead because excess capacity exists. Beyond 2 years, however, the cost to make must include fixed overhead. If piston pins are not made, increased production of some other part will, in the normal course of business, carry its full share of fixed overhead. One alternative is to consider the make or buy decision separately for each of the 2 time periods. While the analysis may indicate that it is profitable to make the pins in both cases, it will probably reveal that it is profitable to make the pins only for the first 2 years and to buy them beyond that date. In this case, several qualitative factors must be investigated to determine the practical feasibility of a split course of action. If the split course of action does not appear feasible, a second alternative is to compute a weighted average cost to make the pins during both time periods. The cost data can then be used in considering the total make or buy question. In practice, an infinite number of situations exist between the 2 extremes of excess capacity and full capacity. There is no simple, absolutely accurate solution to any of these problems. Each situation must be analyzed in its own dynamic context. Precautions in developing costs. If a firm decides to buy a part that it has made in the past, it must exercise particular care in interpreting the quotations it receives from potential suppliers. Some suppliers may prepare the quotation carelessly with the mistaken idea that the user does not really intend to buy the part. Other suppliers may bid unrealistically low in an attempt to induce the user to discontinue making the part in favor of buying it. Once the user has discontinued its make operation, resumption of the operation in the future may be costly. Thus, the user may be at the mercy of the supplier if the supplier later chooses to increase the price. It is essential that the supply management professional carefully evaluate the reliability of all quotations in his or her attempt to determine a realistic estimate of the total cost to buy the part. In estimating the cost to make a part, an analyst must be sure that the firm possesses adequate equipment and technical know-how to do the job. Moreover, in an industry where technological change occurs rapidly, a firm can find its equipment and know-how competitively outmoded in a few short years. Thus, the factor of obsolescence should also be given adequate consideration in determining the ultimate cost of equipment and personnel training. The proper equipment to make an item sometimes may be easier to acquire than the properly skilled labor. Large volume requirements, complex skill requirements, and unique geographic locations can precipitate shortages of adequately skilled labor. In preparing cost to make estimates, the local labor situation must be evaluated. If it is necessary to import adequately skilled personnel, total labor costs can exceed initial estimates substantially. In the case of a make decision, it is equally important to investigate the availability and price stability of required raw materials. Large users of particular materials generally find the availability and price structure of those materials much more favorable than do small unspecialized users. Wise analysts ensure that their estimates for raw materials are realistic. Control of production and quality. Consider now some of the factors other than costs that influence make or buy decisions. Two conditions weigh heavily in some firms' decisions to make a particular part: control of production and control of quality. Production requirements. The need for close control of production operations is particularly acute in some firms. A company whose sales demand is subject to extreme short-term fluctuations finds that its production department must operate on unusually tight time schedules. This kind of company often produces a small inventory of parts used in several different products. However, it produces to individual customer order the parts unique to a particular product or customer specification. Sales fluctuations for products that use unique parts therefore influence the planning and scheduling of numerous assembly and subassembly operations, as well as single part production operations. Efficient conduct of assembly operations depends on the firm's ability to obtain the unique unstocked parts on short notice. Quality requirements. Unique quality requirements often represent a second condition requiring control of part production operations. Certain parts in technical products are occasionally quite difficult to manufacture. Compounding this difficulty at times is an unusually exacting quality specification the part must meet. In certain technological fields or in particular geographical areas, a user may find that the uniqueness of the task results in unsatisfactory performance by an outside supplier. Some companies find that their own firm is in a better position to do an acceptable production job than are external suppliers. A user normally understands more completely than an outside supplier the operational intricacies connected with the use of the part. Therefore, if the using firm makes the part itself, there can be greater coordination between the assembly operation and the part production operation. Conducting both operations under one roof likewise eliminates many communications problems that can arise between a supply management professional and supplier whose operations are geographically separated. Finally, large users often possess technological resources superior to those of smaller suppliers. Such resources may be needed in solving new technical problems in production. Total cost components. There are three components of cost that must be captured when developing a total cost ownership model: acquisition costs, ownership costs, and post-ownership costs. Let's examine all of them. Acquisition costs. Acquisition costs are the initial costs associated with the purchase of materials, products, and services. They are not long-term costs of ownership, but rather represent an immediate cash outflow. The first one is purchase price. The price paid for direct and indirect materials, a product or a service, is frequently the major component of the item's total cost. Acquisition costs may include freight and delivery, site preparation, installation, and testing. Supply management professionals can reduce acquisition costs by negotiating effectively, obtaining quantity discounts, standardizing specifications, and completing a value analysis. In addition, strategic cost analysis offers methods to analyze and understand suppliers' costs, allowing for more fruitful negotiations and enhancement of supplier relationships. The purchase of used materials and equipment of acceptable quality is another way to lower acquisition costs. A supply management professional must not compromise long-term ownership costs by focusing on purchase price alone. Planning costs. Costs incurred during the acquisition process include the costs of developing requirements and specifications, performing price and cost analysis, supplier selection, sourcing, contract determination, initial order processing, and monitoring. Increasing the spending in these areas at times can reduce future ownership use costs. For example, during the development phase of a new product, time spent with engineering representatives and the supplier to replace custom parts with standardized ones will generally reduce the initial purchase price as well as facilitate future repair, replacement, and inventory carrying costs. Quality costs. The higher initial cost of engineering in quality during the design phase generally lowers future ownership and post-ownership costs for both the purchaser and the customer. Selecting and certifying a supplier to obtain the optimal level of quality and monitoring the results using, for example, design of experiments and statistical process control ensures the achievement of the desired quality. In addition, the quality of the relationship established during this process can have long-term benefits. Long-term strategic relationships improve communications and may facilitate product innovation and cost reduction, especially in a cross-functional environment. Taxes. A firm that sources internationally must address the impact of taxes, both direct and indirect, on the cost of procured materials and products. Companies spend endless hours haggling over freight rates, the cost of warehousing services, and the purchase price of goods, but they typically pay little attention to the hidden expenses that can inflate a supply chain's costs. One of the most pervasive of these hidden expenses is taxes. Supply chain managers need to sit down with their tax colleagues to minimize the global impact of all taxes on supply chain operations. When sourcing nationally, the firm must consider differences in state and local taxes. Experienced tax professionals must be included in the cross-functional team when taxes are a concern. The impact of taxes can be significant. The added cost of addressing domestic and international tax issues upfront may have a significant effect in reducing the purchase price. Financing costs. Whether purchasing inventory and materials, opening new facilities, or investing in equipment, the acquisition team should consider the quantitative and qualitative costs of financing alternatives, which are considered ongoing acquisition costs. A business can finance an acquisition using surplus cash, debt financing, secured and unsecured term loans, mortgages, revolving lines of credit, capital leases, etc., or equity financing, issue different classes of stock, form new partnerships and joint ventures, etc. Each form of financing has costs and benefits. The creditworthiness of the firm, cash flow, profitability, debt load, and future sales, and the expected return on the investment are key variables in making this determination. The cost of money is normally not a supply management professional's concern, but must be considered by the firm. Next group is ownership costs. Ownership costs are the costs after the initial purchase associated with the ongoing use of a purchased product or material. Ownership costs are both quantitative and qualitative. Examples of costs that are quantifiable include energy usage, scheduled maintenance, repair, and financing, lease versus buy. Qualitative costs, although difficult to quantify, remain important considerations when making purchases. Examples of qualitative costs include ease of use, aesthetic, and ergonomic. The sum of both types of cost may exceed the initial purchase price and have a significant bearing on cash flow, profitability, and even employee morale and productivity. Understanding and minimizing these costs can have strategic significance. The supply management professional considers the following additional cost categories before making a significant purchase decision. Downtime costs. Making a purchase decision based solely on purchase price may have long-term implications depending on the reason for the lower price. A seller may discount a premium item to move excess inventory and to increase sales. It may also want to dump a troublesome product on an unsuspecting purchaser. A new entrant in the market may discount an unproven product in an effort to gain market share. Often the selling price is representative of the quality of the product. Presumably, the higher the price, the higher the quality. Whatever the reason, the long-run costs associated with a purchase may include non-value added downtime. Risk costs. Weighing the risk of an inventory stockout in a retail or manufacturing business against the opportunity cost of maintaining excess inventory is an important issue. Keeping extra inventory just in case can be a stopgap decision or a needlessly costly move. In just-in-time literature, just-in-case inventory is treated as a form of waste that a company should endeavor to reduce or eliminate. Some costs of excess inventory include those associated with financing, reduced cash flow, lost interest on cash flow, obsolescence, theft, and additional floor space. Consider risk cost when purchasing from new suppliers. Issue dependability, risk avoidance maneuver, multiple sourcing. Using new materials, processes, and equipment in manufacturing. Issues reliability, flexibility, and suitability. Risk avoidance maneuver, parallel processing. Hiring new employees. The issue is adaptability and risk avoidance maneuver, additional training and backup personnel. Or choosing legal representation. Issue is expertise and risk avoidance maneuver is multiple representation. Careful investigation and the development of appropriate sources of supply will reduce the inherent risk associated with the unknown, untried, and unproven. The appropriate place to begin is in the planning or acquisition stage, where a risk assessment study should be conducted. Spending upfront to reduce a risk is an investment in the long-run efficiency and profitability of any firm. Cycle time costs. Whether decreasing a new product's time to market or increasing the number of items produced in an hour, the throughput, reducing cycle time can increase profitability and return on investment while lower total costs. An organization with vision will apply the principles discussed throughout this course to shorten the time to complete all relevant purchasing and production activities. Practices that a supply management professional can employ that may have significant impact include implementing just-in-time materials management, forming strategic alliances with key suppliers, and establishing cross-functional alliances within the organization. The higher the initial cost of establishing and implementing these goals will provide a long-run savings in the cost of direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. In addition, qualitative savings may accrue in the form of a smoother running, more user-friendly organization. Conversion costs. Buying the wrong material, whether in quality, form, or design, can increase the cost of conversion. The application of direct labor and manufacturing overhead to direct materials to create a product or service. As discussed, material not optimized for the production process can increase labor and overhead usage, and thus, because throughput is decreased and the cost of maintaining the quality of the finished product is increased, the total cost of production. In addition, machine time, labor requirements, scrap, and rework may add to the unit cost. Spending too little time and money in the acquisition of materials may result in spending more time and money during production. Other areas that affect conversion costs include production methods, employee training and working environment, and the methods of accounting for product costs, especially in the application of overhead costs to units of product. A well-informed and well-trained supply management professional may have the ability to influence decision-making in these areas when working in a cross-functional environment. Non-value-added costs. Non-value-added costs flourish in most businesses. It is estimated that some 40% of all costs add little or no value. Some examples of non-value-added activities that add cost to a product or service include moving and stockpiling batches of direct materials and work-in-process inventory, maintaining cumbersome operating procedures that duplicate efforts, routing daily service appointments in a random fashion rather than designing routes that minimize travel time. Total quality management, continuous improvement, activity-based costing, and activity-based management are incremental change approaches that help identify non-value-added activities. Process reengineering is a more radical approach to change that focuses on simplification and elimination of wasted effort. Supply management professionals with a background in management, operations, manufacturing, finance, information technology, and logistics are qualified to make suggestions to suppliers that reduce non-value-added costs. A successful strategy, when possible and cost-effective, is to visit a supplier's manufacturing site and observe how production takes place. Careful scrutiny may reveal a number of non-value-added costs that the supplier can reduce or eliminate, thus allowing for negotiations on lowering the supplier's price. Observing a service provider's processes, either on site or at its place of operation, may reveal non value added costs that, when eliminated, will provide savings to both parties. Supply chain supply network costs. If you process map a supply chain and examine the material movement alone, such as the ins and outs of material flow from one organization to another, you will find many opportunities to eliminate waste. Of course, waste adds unnecessary costs to purchased materials and services as well as to logistics. A supply management professional should consider the following interrelated areas for developing better cost reduction strategies: forecasting, administration, transportation, inventory, manufacturing, customer service, supplier selection and relationships, and global sourcing. Well-trained supply management professionals armed with this knowledge can bring fresh insight to the table when developing total cost of ownership models and negotiating throughput the supply chain. The last category is post-ownership costs. In the past, salvage value and disposal costs were the major inputs required when estimating post-ownership costs of capital purchases. These costs could be estimated as cash inflows, the sale of used plant and equipment, or outflows such as demolition of an obsolete facility. An appraiser of industrial equipment could help estimate the future worth of the plant and equipment. Often companies made investments with absolute certainty of future appreciation, although estimating actual appreciation required more information than was available. Today, supply management professionals must address these issues. In addition, three other factors with potential long-term impact must be addressed when performing a total cost of ownership analysis on equipment, a plant, direct materials, a product, or a service: long-term environmental impact, unanticipated warranty and product liabilities, and the negative marketing implications of low customer satisfaction. Let's see each one of them. Environmental costs. Gasoline stations in California have faced the unplanned expenditure of replacing their underground gas storage tanks with more environmentally friendly models. They have also been required to sanitize the soil near the tank if leakage has occurred. This expenditure has cost many independent operators their businesses, devalued the property if polluted and unsafe, and increased the margin required on each gallon of gas sold to help recover such expenditures. This type of post-ownership cost is becoming more common as environmental problems persist. Warranty costs. A poorly designed and produced product may have unanticipated warranty-related costs. A well-trained supply management professional participating in a cross-functional team in product or service design may point out potential warranty recall costs early enough so that more emphasis is placed on designing and producing a defect-free and reliable product or service. Product liability costs. Companies engaged in all types of business have faced unanticipated product liability costs due to poorly designed or produced products and services. For example, fuel tanks that explode on impact due to poor design, tire threads that separate due to poor design or manufacture, inferior materials or improper inflation by end users, faulty ignition switches that cause cars to stall at inopportune moments, lawyers and accountants who have not performed their services according to professional standards, and retail outlets that sell defective merchandise. This list is long, and the remedies usually requires expenditures often not covered by insurance reimbursement. Customer dissatisfaction costs. Some 75% of field failures in consumer goods can be attributed to defects in purchased materials. Field failures lead to customer dissatisfaction. When a customer is dissatisfied with a product, he or she frequently shares this dissatisfaction with many friends and acquaintances, some of whom may be potential customers. This flow of negative publicity frequently results in lost sales or customer dissatisfaction costs. Total cost of ownership and net present value analysis are very similar in philosophy, Both attempt to estimate and analyze the acquisition cost, operating costs, and post-ownership costs in terms of value likely to be received by the company in addition. Net present value analysis attempts to analyze revenues and other cash inflows. Net present value uses the present value of a sum of future cash flows discounted by a required rate of return. The larger the positive net present value, the more likely the investment will return more than required over its life. A net present value of 0 is the point of indifference. A net present value greater than 0 usually suggests that the investment should be accepted. A negative net present value indicates that the overall return will be less than the minimum rate of return required by the company for the investment. An example of a net present value analysis is presented in this table. The table provides an example that demonstrates, based on actual and accurately estimated cash inflows and outflows, that this machine would be an unattractive investment. The required rate of return is 20%, and this investment returns 15.66%. Alternatively, the net present value is negative, so the investment opportunity should be rejected. Other potential investments may be more attractive. Qualitative considerations which cannot be used in this calculation may either support or not support this purchase. Obviously, poorly constructed estimates of future cash flows and discount rates may provide meaningless information. Total cost of ownership, like net present value, requires an analysis of the holding period of the asset. Total cost of ownership focuses on estimating and analyzing the ownership and post-ownership costs. The following formula represents a simplified approach to total cost of ownership analysis. Using the data presented in the table from the previous slide, the total cost of ownership calculation is shown in this table. This type of analysis can be repeated on competing machines. The machine with the lowest total cost of ownership should be the best one, other considerations being equal. This analysis focuses on costs or cash outflows and not cash inflows. Additionally, it considers the present value of those outflows. Incorporating net present value analysis, when applicable, into a total cost of ownership analysis will provide additional input that will allow the analyst to make a sound recommendation between alternatives. A note about estimated costs. Since total cost of ownership and net present value analysis require estimates of future costs of cash outflows, their reliability in providing useful information is only as good as the quality of the input data. A well-conceived analysis should rely on inputs provided by cross-functional representatives with specific knowledge of and interest in the subject of the analysis. The most interested team member should provide the estimate. For example, supply management provides data on purchase price, plant engineering provides an estimate of potential downtime costs, marketing provides an estimate of support costs, and manufacturing provides an estimate of productivity or efficiency costs. A good rule of thumb is to include relevant participants who want to be part of the process. The importance of total cost of ownership in supply management. Purchase price is only one component of the cost of purchasing material, a product, or a service. Total cost of ownership should be a permanent concept in every supply management professional's mind, whether in a service, retail, or manufacturing firm. Our emphasis on acquisition cost or purchase price frequently results in a failure to address other significant ownership and post-ownership costs. Total cost of ownership is a philosophy for really understanding all supply chain related costs of doing business with a particular supplier for a particular good or service. Some typical ownership costs include those associated with processing inventory, repair, maintenance, warranty, training, operating, inventory carrying, contract administration, and downtime costs for operating equipment. Post-ownership costs may include those of disposal and environmental cleanup. The addition of risk and its associated costs adds yet another dimension. These costs and others must be estimated and included in a total cost analysis. Total cost of ownership is relevant not only for the firm that wants to reduce its cost of doing business, but also for the firm that aims to design products or services that provide the lowest total cost of ownership to end customers. Supply management personnel can facilitate the total cost of ownership analysis by combining their broad-based analytical skills with those of other team members to ensure that all relevant costs are considered. A brief examination of each type of business, together with supply management's vision and role in minimizing total cost, is a good place to begin. Service providers. Services firms provide seemingly intangible products to satisfy human wants and needs. Service providers run the gamut from accounting, legal and medical professions to federal, state and local governments to window washers, gardeners and taxi drivers. Service providers procure capital equipment, products and services as well as hire employees and provide employee benefits such as health and life insurance. Like all businesses, service firms enhance profitability by increasing sales at a faster rate than costs, maintaining sales and reducing costs, or increasing sales and reducing costs, while maintaining the desired quality and timeliness. Understanding what drives the cost of overhead expenditures is crucial to any service business. Service revenue must cover the direct costs, material and labor, and overhead in order to generate a profit. Depreciation is a key element of overhead. We define depreciation as the systematic transfer of the cost of a capital expenditure, an asset on the balance sheet, to expense, the income statement. Another important cost element is the cost of maintaining capital and operating equipment. A total cost of ownership analysis of equipment purchases may help reduce the expenditures for maintenance and parts over the lives of the investment. Another important consideration in service businesses, as well as in those of retail and manufacturing, is the total cost of maintaining the employee base. Paying the lowest wage does not necessarily result in the most cost-effective employee. The cost of getting a new and inexperienced employee up to speed can be high and the learning curve long. Paying more for an experienced person with a short ramp-up time may be the best long-term solution for a given position. A total cost, total benefit analysis of company-sponsored health insurance programs can reap rewards in terms of lower per-person total costs, greater benefits for covered employees, and improved morale. Retail. The considerations that apply to service businesses also apply to retailers. Retail businesses sell a product that often must be ordered, received, inventoried, sold, and perhaps delivered to the customer. The choice of a system that facilitates the processes involved in inventory ordering and turnover will influence the total cost of inventory ownership. Many major retailers have empowered select suppliers to manage their product inventory for them, thus reducing purchasing overhead and inventory carrying costs without necessarily increasing the product cost. Embracing the just-in-time philosophy is another way to improve quality, cost, and time while reducing total cost of ownership. Lowering the cost of goods sold and the overhead cost associated with procurement, inventory carrying costs, and sales improves the bottom line. It is often easier to lower costs than to increase sales in a competitive business environment. Manufacturing. Manufacturing businesses are concerned with the same total cost of ownership issues as are service and retail firms. In addition, they procure direct materials, raw materials, products, sub-assemblies, etc., and incur overhead in the production of their finished goods inventory and other activities required when conducting business. Managerial accountants place emphasis on the variance between what something should cost or is expected to cost and what it actually costs. Price variance analyses are often misleading. For example, a favorable price variance, the material cost less than anticipated, when compared to an unfavorable quantity variance, more material was used than anticipated, may indicate that although the material was less expensive, it was of a lower quality and therefore more was used. If you compare this to an unfavorable labor efficiency variance, more labor was used to work with the material than anticipated, it becomes clear that a lower acquisition price may translate into higher production costs. Considering all costs simultaneously, supply management professionals and other members of the product development team can better determine the right specifications for the material and ensure that suppliers meet these guidelines. The accurate allocation of manufacturing overhead is a major factor in calculating the true unit cost of a product. Using the wrong cost driver, process, or activity that creates the need for overhead can make a product seem more or less expensive than it actually is. Activity-based costing, although initially somewhat complicated and expensive to implement, can return long-term benefits by providing more accurate unit cost information that serves as the basis of better decisions. Supply chain supply networks. A supply chain is a set of three or more entities, organizations, or individuals directly involved in the upstream and downstream flows of products, services, finances, and information from a source to a customer. A supply network is a less linear, more flexible, virtual system linked by advanced communication systems and enhanced supply relations. A supply management professional or organization can apply the philosophy and practice of total cost of ownership to the strategic optimization of costs within the chain or network. For example, an American company with the option of making a new product in Asia, potentially lower manufacturing costs, and shipping it to its customer base in the United States, higher transportation costs, or manufacturing it in the United States, potentially higher manufacturing costs with minimal shipping, lower transportation costs, will have to determine the total cost of each alternative before making a decision. Although much of this analysis is ultimately quantifiable in dollars, some elements will require a qualitative evaluation offering less certainty. In this example, at first Asia may seem the logical choice, but distance from the customer base and other international issues may guide the decision to domestic production. The most important part of procurement is finding the right supplier, and the general advice is that a poor supplier causes more problems than poor materials. There is no point in having a well-designed product if the supplier cannot actually deliver it, so procurement must identify a supplier who can do the work, guarantee high quality, stick to delivery schedules, and meet all other requirements. To put it simply, procurement has to find a well-qualified supplier, and this means one that is financially secure with good long-term prospects, can develop and wants to maintain long-term relationships, has the ability and capacity to supply the materials requested, is experienced and has expertise in their products, only sends materials of guaranteed high quality, delivers reliably on time with short lead times, accurately delivers materials ordered, quotes acceptable prices, offers good financial terms and total cost of acquisition, is flexible to customer needs and changes to orders, has a good reputation in the industry, and uses convenient and easy procurement systems. In different circumstances, many other factors might be important, such as convenient location, ability to deal with variable demand, regular delivery runs, specialized transport, and so on. Most organizations have a list of approved suppliers who have given good service in the past, or who are otherwise known to be reliable. If there is no acceptable supplier on file, procurement managers have to search for one. For low-value items, they probably look in catalogs, trade journals, or through business contacts. More expensive items need a thorough search, and this can be very time-consuming. We have hinted at the procedure for identifying a qualified supplier in the list of procurement activities and can list a reasonable set of steps explicitly. First, review market conditions to get a clear view of the conditions of supply. Build a long list of qualified suppliers who can deliver the materials. Compare organizations on this long list and eliminate those who are, for any reason, less desirable. Continue eliminating organizations until you have a short list, usually 4 or 5, of the most promising suppliers. Prepare an inquiry or request for quotation and send it to the shortlist. Receive bids from the shortlist. Do a preliminary evaluation of bids and eliminate those with major problems. Do a technical evaluation to see if the products meet all specifications. Do a commercial evaluation to compare the costs and other conditions. Arrange a pre-work meeting to discuss bids with the remaining suppliers. Discuss and negotiate specific conditions that have to be met. Choose a preferred supplier that is most likely to win the order. Arrange a pre-commitment meeting to sort out any last-minute details. Finalize details and award a contract an order to the preferred supplier. Often the steps are concluded within a procurement department, but sometimes, perhaps with government work, procurement has to be more open and visibly fair. Then all potential suppliers must have an opportunity to submit quotations, and rather than focusing on a short list, managers have to widely advertise for quotations. Then they have to use an established and often published procedure to compare all the bids submitted and choose the one that best meets the prescribed criteria. This is called open tender. A variation reduces the administrative effort by putting some qualifications on suppliers, perhaps based on experience, size, or financial status, and this gives a limited tender. Monitoring performance. Most organizations monitor their suppliers to make sure that they continue to give satisfactory service. This is called supplier rating or vendor rating. This might be done informally by a subjective review, or it might use measures for virtually every aspect of performance. Most organizations use a compromise that gives a reasonable view of performance, but with an acceptable amount of effort. They typically use a checklist of important factors to see if the supplier meets an acceptable standard in each of these. The checklist might ask whether deliveries have been made on time, if the quality is high enough, if the price is still competitive, if there have been any complaints, and so on. When a supplier does not meet any criterion, the customer may discuss performance with the vendor, ask for specific improvements, and then look for ways of achieving these improvements. It takes time to find a good supplier, so a customer should only start looking for a new one as a last resort. A more useful approach to rating gives the supplier a score for different aspects of performance. For instance, a firm might give a supplier a score out of 10 for on-time delivery, and if over time the score drifts down below 8, the firm can start discussing ways of improvement. Unfortunately, such scoring models can be difficult to use, as everyone has to agree the most important factors to measure, the importance of each, the actual performance, and the lowest acceptable performance. Real results are likely to come from a combination of discussion and agreement rather than more precise measurement. An important decision for procurement concerns the best number of suppliers to use. In the extreme, a firm might move to single suppliers where it buys each material or related materials from only a single supplier. The argument for single sourcing is that it allows trading partners to develop mutually beneficial relationships over the long term, and typically brings the benefits like a stronger relationship between customers and suppliers, often formalized in alliances or partnerships. Commitment of all parties to the success of the relationship. Discussions that lead to better performance, economies of scales, and price discounts with larger orders. Easier communications, reduced administration, and simpler procedures for regular orders. Less variation in materials and their supply. Greater ease in maintaining confidentiality or requirements, conditions, and so on. There is a strong trend towards the use of fewer suppliers, so there is a little doubt that these benefits are convincing. However, the alternative view is that a firm becomes too vulnerable when it relies on a single supplier, and it can become vulnerable to events over which it has no control. To avoid this, some organizations have a policy of buying the same materials from a number of competing suppliers. They might use rules of thumb like never let a manufacturer account for more than 20% of total revenue, never let a customer absorb more than 50% of total resources. The advantages of multi-sourcing include the following. Competition between suppliers reduces prices. There is less chance of disrupted supplies, as problems can be avoided by switching suppliers. It is easier to deal with varying demands. Involving more organizations can give access to wider knowledge and information. It is more likely to encourage innovation. Multi-sourcing gives one way of avoiding potential problems, but an alternative uses forward buying. This makes an arrangement now for a number of deliveries faced over different points in the future. This guarantees suppliers over some period in the future and minimizes the effects of possible disruptions. Because the purchases are at fixed costs, it also reduces the risks from price rises. Of course, things can still go wrong. A company that signs a long-term contract can still go out of business, or a warehouse can burn down, but the chances of a problem are much smaller. Once they have chosen a supplier, managers have to set about the actual procedure of procurement. Despite the inevitable differences in detail, we can give a general approach to procurement. In practice, the procedure for buying often includes the selection of the suppliers, which we discussed in previous lecture. So the following description includes elements of supplier selection, which shows how the jobs are interrelated. We know that procurement starts with the user identifying a need for materials, moves through supplier selection, and then arranges the purchase. The whole procedure finishes when materials are delivered and paid for. This typical procedure has the steps shown in this picture and is traditionally based on a series of key documents. The first step, the user department identifies a need for purchased materials, prepares specifications to describe the details, checks departmental budgets and gets clearance to purchase, and prepares and sends a purchase request to procurement. Then procurement receive, verify and check the purchase request, examine the materials requested, looking at current stocks, alternative products, make or buy options and so on, and then confirm the decision to purchase. Afterwards, they form a long list and then short list of possible suppliers, from regular suppliers, preferred suppliers and so on, and then they send a request for quotations to this short list. Then in step 3, each supplier examines the request for quotations, checks the customer status, credit and so on, sees how it could best satisfy the order, and sends a quotation back to the company giving details of products, prices and conditions. Then in step 4, procurement examines the quotations and do commercial evaluations, discuss technical aspects with the user department, check budget details, choose the best supplier, discuss, negotiate and finalize terms and conditions with the supplier, and issue a purchase order for the materials with the terms and conditions attached. Then in step 5, the chosen supplier receives, acknowledges and processes the purchase order, organizes all operations needed to supply the materials, ships materials together with a shipping advice, and sends an invoice. Then in step 6, the procurement acknowledges the delivery, do any necessary follow-up and expediting, receive, inspect and accept the materials, and notify the user department of materials received. Then in step 7, the user department receives and checks the materials, authorizes transfer from budgets, updates inventory records, uses the materials as needed. And then in step 8, the procurement arranges payment of the supplier's invoice. The first 3 steps sort out the materials and suppliers, and then the crucial point comes with the issue of a purchase order in step 4. At this point, the organization agrees to buy specified materials from a supplier, and the supplier agrees to deliver them. The purchase order becomes a legal contract between 2 trading partners, which both of them have to stick to. It is also the trigger that keeps materials moving along the supply chain. This procedure seems complicated, but if you buy something expensive, it is worth the effort to make sure that everything is clearly defined and there are no misunderstandings. For major purchases, there are more complicated procedures to fix product specifications, negotiate terms, sort out finances, and so on. On the other hand, it is clearly not worth going through the whole procedure for small purchases. If you're buying pencils, the shop next door is probably as good as any other suppliers. Normally, an organization should put little effort into procurement when buying low-value materials. There is only one qualified supplier. There is already a successful arrangement with the supplier. There is not enough time for extended negotiations, and the organization has a policy of selecting specific types of suppliers. Apart from its cost, another problem with the formal procedure is the time it takes. A lot of work has been done to reduce both the cost and time for procurement. For instance, blanket orders use a single order to cover all the deliveries of materials over some specified time in the future. Value analysis uses a team of people from different functional areas to find substitute materials that are lower in price but equally as good as the original. Single sourcing and other long-term arrangements eliminate the need to identify suppliers and negotiate terms. But these adjustments do not really tackle the underlying problem of time, cost, and unreliability. With traditional paper-based procurement, staff typically spend a third of their time dealing with problems that occur when the procedure fails in some way. A major step in improving procurement obviously came with electronic purchasing. Electronic data interchange laid the foundations for automated procurement in the 1980s. There are now many variations on automated procurement, all of which are considered under the general heading of e-procurement. We will explore it in the next lecture. The essence of e-procurement is that trading partners somehow link their information systems. At a basic level, this might involve procurement managers transmitting orders through their supplier's website. At a more sophisticated level, efficient consumer response links systems, and when it is time to place another order for materials, a message is automatically passed back to the supplier, who responds by automatically arranging a delivery. Although the cost savings are significant, e-procurement does more than this and brings the advantages of allowing instant access to suppliers anywhere in the world, creating a transparent market where products and terms are readily available, automating procurement with standard procedures, greatly reducing the time needed for transactions, reducing costs typically by 12 to 15%, convenient access to markets that are always available, outsourcing some procurement activities to suppliers or third parties, and integrating seamlessly with suppliers' information systems. The two main types of e-procurement are described as business to business, where one business buys materials from another business, and business to customer, when a final customer buys from a business. Other options include business to government, customer to customer, or even business to employee. Most of us are familiar with business to customer transactions where we buy books, music, software, or travel from websites. It is difficult to get reliable figures for e-business, in part because there are so many different forms of shopping that might be included, but business to customer is likely to continue growing strongly. Of course, a problem with business to customer is that people do not necessarily like e-procurement. If you want to buy a book, you can use various websites and get it delivered within a few days. But it may be better to go to your nearest bookshop, examine a copy, decide if you really want it, and then bring it home immediately. People often want to see and touch what they are buying rather than just read about it. Customer-to-customer transactions are growing largely through online auctions where customers bid against each other for products. The best known of these is eBay. In terms of volume, business to business is much more important than business to customer, because a supply chain might include many business to business transactions before a final business to customer one. Business to business started with direct links between two companies, and then more tools helped formats, starting with buying exchanges. These have major companies creating their own private networks for dealing with suppliers, and they only trade with members of this network. Buying exchanges evolved into e-marketplaces, which are large websites that allow easier interactions and transactions generally between two businesses. Essentially, they help buyers find suppliers, help suppliers find new buyers, make business-to-business transactions faster, easier, and cheaper, manage all the payments and transactions. Such marketplaces can specialize in specific industries or work across industries, but specialize in specific types of products. Another distinction has vertical marketplaces for transactions within the same supply chain and horizontal marketplaces which work across different supply chains. Some major companies set up their own e-marketplaces, and any business that wants to work with them has to use it. This also allows reverse auctions, where a company publishes its requirements in the e-marketplace and asks suppliers to bid. The supplier that gives the best bid before the end of the specified auction time wins the contract. An obvious comment about e-procurement is that it may organize the procedures for procurement very efficiently, but this does not necessarily improve the physical flow of materials. There is no point in having an impressive website to collect orders, but then have a poor delivery system. The real barrier to business entry is the back end, or fulfillment, not the website itself. So to get the benefits of e-business, organizations have to redesign their logistics and supply chains to give appropriate responses. We have been looking at procurement largely from the customer's point of view, but the receipt of an order needs a response from the supplier, and this also has some kind of procedure. Typically, a supplier has to check if the materials are in stock, order more from its own suppliers, make parts and all the other steps needed to prepare materials and ship them to customers. This figure here outlines these procedures. The time taken clearly depends on all sorts of factors and might range from a few minutes for things already in stock to years for major items that have to be designed and built. We said that the effort put into procurement should match the value of the materials bought. And in general, the higher the cost of materials and the more complicated the requirements, the more time and effort procurement needs. Many organizations formalize this into set rules, perhaps using ad hoc procedures for buying routine, low-value supplies. A simple automatic procedure for purchases up to $20,000. A more rigorous procedure for purchases up to $150,000, and special analysis for bigger purchases. But it may be better to consider the importance of materials rather than their price. And here is a model 3M approach, which describes the following types of materials. Non-critical materials with low profits and little risk to supply. They need basic simple procedures for purchasing. Bottleneck materials with low profits but more risk to supply. These need long-term contracts with alternative sources to avoid potential problems. Strategic materials with higher profits. These need more formal relationships with suppliers over the long term, possibly developing into alliances and partnerships. Once such rules are established, managers can use supplier rating to monitor the results, make sure that things are going well, purchases are actually made as expected, the effort is reasonable in relation to the cost and importance, and that the procedure is not failing in some way. This approach of using different procurement procedures for different types of product is illustrated in the distinction between repeat orders and new ones. If a supplier has given good service over some extended time, purchasers can avoid most of the steps in procurement and simply send a repeat order. This is a routine message that effectively says, send another order like the last one. A variation on this has blanket orders, where a single order is placed to cover deliveries over some period in the future. This reduces the amount of administration and has the same effects as forward buying. Comparing terms. The different types of purchase all become more complicated when you look into the legal details of each. Not just ownership but also rights and responsibilities. Imagine the scene by the side of a railway where there has been an accident involving a passenger train. In a privatized industry, discussions start immediately about whether the blame might lie with the train operator, the company that owns the track, the company that maintains the track, the company that owns the rolling stock, the company that supplies the crew, and so on. There are so many different ways of purchasing. Together, with different terms and conditions that it's difficult to compare them. You see this problem when buying a commodity such as electricity or a telephone and internet service. In principle, it seems fairly easy to choose the best suppliers as the one that gives the lowest price, but there are also so many different options that it's difficult to identify the lowest price. In general, there are 4 ways of setting a price for materials. Price lists, where suppliers quote fixed prices. When you go into a supermarket, the prices displayed are fixed. This may appear as published price lists, and everyone pays the same fixed price. Special quotations, where suppliers quote appropriate prices to each customer. Customers ask for a price, usually for non-standard items, and the supplier returns a price and conditions that it is willing to offer to the customer. Typically, larger customers are offered a standard rate of discount. Negotiation, where there is some flexibility in pricing conditions. Then a supplier might quote a price, but will negotiate if it can get some benefits such as repeat orders. Similarly, customers can negotiate if they want special conditions such as fast delivery. Commodity pricing. For commodities such as oil, coffee, gold and weight, market forces set the going rate that is used by all suppliers. The acquisition cost is clearly important, but it is not in an organization's long-term interest to force suppliers to give unrealistically low prices. If a powerful customer forces a supplier to offer an unrealistic price, the supplier will make a loss and eventually go out of business. Apart from the obvious effect of removing the supplier next time the customer wants to buy something, this gives a bad reputation and makes other suppliers reluctant to deal.